Thank you, Mr Chair, and I rise to take a short call in the committee stage of the Kaikoura Marine Management Bill. Certainly it's a piece of legislation that the Labour Party supports. It's had a somewhat unusual development path compared to other marine reserves, and I want to acknowledge the concerns that were raised by submitters not submitters from Kaikoura, but submitters who submitted here in Wellington around the I guess the bypassing of the regular mechanism for establishing a marine reserve. Certainly there were concerns raised about the size of the reserve, the shape of the reserve, and the process that had been undertaken in order to get the reserve in place. But I think any concerns that we had in terms of from the Labour Party perspective were allayed when we travelled to Kaikoura and heard from the Korowai group and the Guardians who had put together the Marine Reserve package. When we talked through the process that they went through, the collaborative process, when we heard the submissions from all the different groups that have interests in this particular piece of ocean, we certainly were convinced that it was a very good piece of work and a piece of work that should be supported, notwithstanding the somewhat unusual process, well, not unusual, that's probably the wrong word, the different process that had been gone through in terms of establishing this marine reserve. Marine reserves are often contentious. You're dealing with a piece of ocean here which actually has, I think, far more existing rights in terms of use, in terms of people making their living off the sea. Fisheries is always difficult to manage when you're establishing marine reserves. Fishing rights and the rights of those who've been fishing there for a long time and who make their livelihood off that activity. But also, of course, in Kaikoura, a lot of tourism activities that occur around this area. So to go to Kaikoura and to hear submissions which were unanimously in favour of a marine reserve was a somewhat surreal experience in my experience, but a very, very positive one. And to hear the power fishermen, the cray fishermen, the tourism operators, iwi, the local community, the local forest and bird organisation, all coming to give very, very positive submissions on this piece of legislation was a very rewarding experience and a very unusual experience for a select committee. And certainly we enjoyed the visiting this very beautiful part of the country and being able to hear firsthand the positivity and the passion for this particular marine reserve, and knowing that it's simply not going to be left to the Department of Conservation to manage. This is something that is owned by the local community, by the local iwi, and as they said to us, this is a starting point. We appreciate that this is slightly unusual in terms of the scope of the marine reserve, but we view this as a starting point and we want to build on it from here. So don't think that this is all there's going to be, and certainly they acknowledge that the lack of shoreline in the marine reserve was unusual, but there were reasons for that and they were aware of it, and that they were going to build on that. So I think that's a very positive message that we can take out of that. And whilst I acknowledge the concerns that were raised more generally about the scope of the marine reserve, I think when you spoke to the people who developed it and gone down there and heard their reasons and their stories for how they got to where they got, I don't think any reasonable person could say that it's a negative. So I want to thank the officials for the work that they did on this particular piece of legislation. Not always easy, as we said, and my colleague Ruth Dyson alluded to one very bizarre problem we had, which was that, and I noticed that the schedules have been completely rewritten to ensure that the GPS coordinates for the marine reserve go to 3 decimal points and not 2, because we did discover that I think the marine reserve was about 20 metres out of place in the legislation. And I noticed that the Minister for Primary Industries is in the House, and maybe he can answer a burning question that the committee had that we weren't able to get fully answered, which is why Ministry for Primary Industries has a policy of only going to 2 decimal places and not 3 decimal places, because it seemed to us fairly, if you've got 3 decimal places, use them, it's going to be more accurate. And we were just told, in what was a very gliding on moment, it's just MPI policy. 2 decimal places. Well, that's very efficient, but I wonder if the Minister for Primary Industries could tell me why the Ministry for Primary Industries has a strict policy, a strict 2 decimal place policy instead of 3 decimal places. And I hope that the Minister for Primary Industries will bring, Mr Chair.
Wainamaki.
Thank you. Will bring his ministry into the 21st century and move to a 3 decimal place policy as quickly as possible, because having a marine reserve that's 20 metres out of place is not insignificant. Mr Chair. So, as I said, this bill was started, this marine reserve started by Chris Carter. It's gone through 4 ministers of conservation. It will hopefully get the unanimous support of this House. I'm very, very pleased. Again, slightly unusual process that we're going through in order to ensure that this passes before the election. But I'm very, very pleased that my last speech in this session of Parliament is on something positive and on something that we have unanimous agreement on, and on something that I'm sure will benefit generations to come, not just on the Kaikoura coast, but right across New Zealand. This truly is a very special part of the country. I was privileged to visit it for the first time when the Select Committee was hearing submissions, and I want to wish you well, Mr Chair, in your future endeavours, and acknowledge your valedictory speech last night. But as we close this session of Parliament, I think this is an extremely good bill to go out on.
Thank you. Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I take a call on behalf of New Zealand First in the Kaikoura Titai o Marokura Marine Management Bill, and it's a great pleasure that this will be the last